yeah, brothers and sisters, welcome to the Void. Today we have, I think, like a double special episode coming at you. Number one, because we're delving into the mayhem of the Hell's Angels, and number two, because with me is a spirit fish on his birthday day. How we doing there, birthday fish?
We're doing awesome, man.
Yeah, I don't know where I'm going with that. It might pop in and out for the rest of the episode, but how old are we turning today, man?
We're turning 34, and with that, I wanted to go through my midlife crisis and join the Hell's Angels. So let's get into it.
Why not? All right. Start by saying thank you for letting me be a little selfish, because when you brought up the idea for this episode of a book report, I was pretty keen on it. I was like, all right, we can read a book and talk about it. That's basically like, wine club of the 21st century, the podcast era wine club where anybody can just join in and do it. And I think in the future, it could be fun to see if we can get listeners to be like, hey, we're going to do this and talk about it. Check it out. But on the note, you had a bunch of cool books, and you did Fear and Loathing. Now, Hunter S. Thompson's like, kind of most people are well aware of some aspect of him. And so thank you for letting me be selfish and say, let's not do Fear and Loathing. Can we try one of his other ones? So you found Riding with the Hells Angels, which I was like, oh, hell yeah, brother. Let's get in there and see what these mayhem disruptors are all about. And it was way different than I thought it would ever be. I had no idea.
Yeah, so more to the backstory is Nagy and I were talking like, hey, what do you want to do for your birthday episode? And I've been pushing Nagy to do a book club for months now. And we finally got to the point where he's like, you know what? We'll do it for your birthday. I gave him a laundry list of books to pick from, in the hopes that he would get something fun and different, and he did. That's for sure.
And I will say, the laundry list was, I had expected a lot of like the self-help things like that. Then like Fear and Loathing was on there. I was like, okay. And then The Help was on there. That one caught me by blindside of being like, hey man, I respect their diversity of reading. Because I personally am very selfish on books and music. When people are like, oh, I'll like read or listen to anything, I'm like, nope, I have very specific genres. And I mean, my buddy Lance, like all my friends can attest that when I ride in the car, they're like, hey, you want to listen to anything? I'm like, yeah, these specific things, please. Like, oh, do you want to try this other side of the list? Like, no, thank you. I've got what I like. I am very much like that. So this was hard to be like, all right, you could pick something, but again, thank you for letting it tailor to my selfish desires.
Yeah, so let's kind of get into it. So we read the Hell's Angels book that Hunter S. Thompson wrote. And what it really was is, wouldn't say it was as much writing as a lot of quotes in journal articles, all kind of mashed together to tell you the story of the Hell's Angels.
Correct. So Hunter S. Thompson actually kind of led the forefront on what is considered now gonzo journalism. And so this style encompasses just that stream of consciousness, fueled into it kind of an objective. It's weird because it balances an objective opinion from the author as well as a bit of a bias because they're right in it. So they're like, hey, I'm in this. I can see how messed up or good this situation is. And they're going to look at it objectively, but also have that personal taste to it.
And it's also fly on the wall type journalism. It's not as much he gets in there, asks questions, interviews people. He's just present and active in the community. And that's how he gets all these stories and brings everything together. But let's start with the history of the Hells Angels, because I find this actually fascinating of how they like came about, which is the first little bit of the book. So it started with a guy named Otto Friedlies. Otto Friedlies was in the Vietnam War, and a lot of these guys were veterans of the Vietnam War. And they had come back and basically just didn't know how to fit into modern society at that time, right? Because you have to remember, these dudes lived in the jungle, smoked cigarettes, shot at people, and hoped that nothing was going to blow them up from under their feet. Like, they lived in a completely different society than we lived in on this side of anything.
Kind of salt of, like, I don't know, kind of a pointing a finger in the eye of society. So the aspects of them having swastikas and German iron crosses and the eagles and stuff like that wasn't so much about them glorifying the Nazis. It was more of just like they wanted symbols on their, all their attire they called the colors. So they wanted all that iconography on their colors to kind of just be like a middle finger to all the, straight and normal squares that are living their life. Like, oh, that guy's going by with a motorcycle. Oh, that guy's got a freaking Nazi iconography on his jackets. Like, and it wasn't, they're like, yeah, the Germans had a bunch of great ideas, but they didn't actually support Nazism.
Yeah. So
which I found kind of interesting.
A lot of what they did was more of a reflection on society. They would just mess with people to do it. Like, if I knew Nagy would walk by and I could say, hey, Trump's the greatest thing to ever happen, and he would get frustrated, they would do it just to watch him get frustrated. They could care less of what they're actually saying. And that's what came with all the embolisms, and they really kind of became a counterculture to society. And the reason for that is once they came back, a lot of these guys were mechanics, infantrymen, gunmen on ships, and didn't have what I like to say is modern society skills, right? Like, they didn't really fit into what we had in the world. So they kind of just created this own culture of bike clubs, and a bunch of bike clubs came out of that, especially out of California. But specifically, the Hells Angels came together and started to just kind of wreak havoc and be a counterculture middle finger to what's happening, because so many people had pushed them out of society because they didn't really fit in, because they were in Vietnam doing completely different things, right?
It was World War II, not Vietnam. The Vietnam era was actually after this one. That was the surprise that I had as well. Otto was a veteran from World War II, so it started after that into the 50s, 60s, and they actually wanted to get into Vietnam, be like, just let us loose. And
that's right. Oh, you are right about that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, then we'll cut back and we'll go to that.
Okay.
And we'll just make it World War II. You know what? I'll add that part where you just interjected and said it's actually World War II. There we go.
Yeah, because that's what caught me off, is at the end of the book when he's like, the Hells Angels wrote a letter to the president being like, put us in Nam. And they never did. But then they had a bunch of other stuff. So,
but yeah, that's completely right, because the Hells Angels are just like, hey, we're tired of being on the outcasts of society. Just pay us, and we're gonna go over there. Like, we'll get on the boats, we'll do the whole things. But they didn't want to
do our thing. Instead of in the biker bars of California and like Nevada and stuff.
Yeah. So they explain that throughout the book, and that's kind of the backstory to the Hells Angels and how they kind of became what they became. But let's go through the book now, because this is super exciting. How did you find this opening scene where it's just the opening journalism of these girls that went to a bonfire, got very well taken advantage of, openly or freely, which didn't really seem to come across? Like, the media said that they didn't, but yet all the guys were like, nah, dude, they definitely just came up and were like, hey. And
it was more confusing than like the first time I read Game of Thrones. Like, I had no idea what was actually going on, because again, this style of journalism it's not really narrative. It's not like, here's the beginning, here's history, here's the whatever. It just starts with like, all right, so there's these chicks, and here's police reports and news articles of these chicks, like 2 teenage girls on a beach ending up in the middle of nowhere at a Hells Angels bonfire, and allegations of either rape and sexual conduct just happening. And I was like, I feel like my book missed like the beginning chapters. And I looked at a couple. I was like, nope, this is just how it starts. Like, it is not like a, hey, welcome to. It's just like, so on this date, these teens had suspected rape cases. Like, okay, I guess.
Like, did I get a director's cut? Did I? Yeah.
But it's just a great introduction to say, like, okay, the Hells Angels just kind of don't give a fuck. But it was weird because it talks how they just were at this beach to party and do things. And that's kind of what they do, is they just do their gatherings, and then the situations around them just lead to like crazy stories and all these different problems.
Well, a lot of it is caused by them, but I think the other thing that you learn through the interviews with the Hells Angels is people know that these guys allow chaos. They allow whatever's going to happen. So if they are coming into town, there are people that want to join in, but anonymously. Like, Nagy would love to show up, but not as a Nagy, because Nagy, if he gets seen by anybody, could get in trouble. So they'll just kind of come and be a part of things. And then when shit goes south, they'll blame it on the Hells Angels. Like, that's what we learned a lot of throughout the whole thing. Now, there were some things that went both ways, where like the Hells Angels blamed it on the other people, and they definitely fucked it up. But there was a decent amount of portrayal of the other way, because one thing that you saw that was really interesting was, first of all, the media and how they really just painted the Hells Angels as bad guys and didn't even tell half their stories. Like, they just pointed them out as clearly a problem.
Right. I mean, it also shows that the difference in time of things, of like, if you throw out a report, and like Thompson does actually get into this, where these people would throw out, violence, destruction, mayhem. Basically, I kept laughing because I think even Thompson says it, that he's like, these guys were just Vikings on Harleys, because they'd go in, rape, pillage, plunder. And then you kind of found out that they really didn't. It was just all these guys getting together. But the news articles, they would just throw out whatever, basically the BuzzFeed articles of the like era of Hells Angels do blank, sell papers. And then when they're like, that actually wasn't the Hells Angels, they're like, it's already printed. We're on, move on.
That happens so many times.
Yeah.
And you really learn that kind of going back to, you can't trust the modern media right? Because like, one of my favorite things that happened is you hear about all these small town shops and bars and whatnot that the Hells Angels would come in and take over, because they're obviously like far enough from cities that nobody cares. And there's like two bartenders that aren't going to argue with 10 dudes in whips and chains.
Leathers and colors. Yeah,
exactly. And oftentimes they would clean up after themselves. Like, they would pay their full bar tabs, they would leave it in cash, and they would clean up the whole bar or clean up the shop and fix tools and stuff. Like, that happened a lot, and they never told those stories in the news at all.
Right. I will even attest, as a bartender at like the Sturgis rally. So this is the way outskirts. We were still up in South Dakota, like in the hills of Rapid City. But everybody passed through. The bikers that came in, like, they'd get rowdy. You'd be like, all right, this guy's on his like 8th beer, and he's like saying how they're going to take these hogs like another 60 miles to get to Sturgis. But they would just throw down like wads of cash, kind of clean up after yourselves. And you'd get like the entitled people and like even families that come in, leave a mess, and they go, I paid for the meal, here's the tip, here's the rest of my crap. Versus, like you said, the bikers who, they're bringing all the pint glasses back, and they're like, we know you're probably out, so here, you can wash these because we all need another reload soon. They're like,
or shit, they'd even go to the bathroom and wash it themselves and go, hey man, can you just, like, you could just
fill it up again. But I mean, anyone who's worked in customer service, you know that like you don't get all the reports of how good things are, but the second something's bad, everybody's going to want to talk about it.
Yeah. There were several stories of these throughout. One of my favorite ones was, apparently one of the younger bikers that was with them had stolen gasoline from one of the gas stations. And the guy came up to him and was like, hey, what the hell, man? And the leader was like really pissed, but what he did was he went to the group, took cash from everybody, and then paid off the guy very quickly and in time with some extra money. And then they all went and later beat the shit out of the kid that did it. But like, even they pay their debts on time when they know something's wrong, right? Because they were like, we were at this gas station, and I'm not shocked that so and so did it, because he does know how to do it, and he does it very, very quickly. That son of a bitch.
It's sort of like that, like we've talked about before, like that chaotic alignment of they have their own specific rules, and they're like, because they would just steal sometimes, like if they were short on money for food because veteran affairs weren't taking care of them, they would go in and clean house on a grocery. But they had already admitted that they hated doing that. Or like if they just stole a group of people's beers at the bar, they were like, yeah, well, this is our bar, they were in our seats, so those were our beers. Like their rules were good, but it's like, yo, you just stole beers from the cool guy, yeah, the whole club would like beat the shit out of him, be like, you don't do that. Like their rules were just their own, but they were very strict on what they could be.
And they would oftentimes trade services because, again, a lot of them were mechanics, carpenters, different military sorts of things, and they would trade those services at places and be like, hey, we don't have food, but like, if you can pay us, we can work on all these cars overnight for you. Right. So you can have all this business done in the morning. And they're like, okay. And they would oftentimes find gigs like that. One thing that they talked about is specifically that they would work in the winter so that they can get unemployment all summer and go ride their bikes.
Just ride. And like that was their thing, is they're riding to all these biker places, and people break down on the side of the road, or they go to a bar. They're like, yeah, we'll give you guys tune-ups if you give us a bar tab.
Yeah, that was incredible to hear about, how they would specifically know what time of season that they had to find a job so that they could get unemployment next year. That was hilarious. I was losing it.
I mean, it was, because a lot of them, they talked, the things that blew me away were, one, the ages. I imagined all Hell's Angels as like the huge beards, gray in the face, just beat down by life. But one of the main characters, his name's like Mama. They called him that because he was like a caretaker. He's like in his late 20s, early 30s. Like most of these guys were stupid young and, didn't go to college, didn't do stuff. It was founded by the guys after World War II. But, by the time the chapters kicked in, it was all these guys that didn't go to college, kind of had trades and did whatever. So the age of those guys was very interesting to me, where these are not rough veterans. It's like they're just young kids that just had picked apart by society, and they're like, they want that vagabond lifestyle of, I have to work through the winter so that the second it's good enough for me to get on my bike, I can be gone.
Dude, and that was the other thing that was fascinating, is this book was over the course of like 10 to 15 years. I couldn't really get the exact time span, but it was at least a decade. And so one of the cool things that you saw is how some of these characters grew up in the gang over time, what's our technical term for it, you think?
The group? a flock of angels? Group. I don't know. Yeah,
the group. And how some of them, as they got older, took more of a leadership role in teaching the younger guys on how to stay in line, how to stay in check, how to have different respects, and so on and so forth. But the one thing that with all that is, you can definitely see where this would be very attractive to a young man that was kind of pushed out by society because X, Y, and Z, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is post-World War II, so it's like late 50s, early 60s. It's getting into Nam. And so it's like that whole period of the U.S. where people are like, oh, I don't need a job. We're just heading out west, just hitching and doing whatever, and you can survive. Like, dude, he talks about they could get 6 packs of beer for like 80 cents. I was like, dude, are you kidding me? Like, so it didn't take a lot to like, hey, let me fix up your cars here for $10. Now I can live for another 2 weeks. Like, that's the equivalent of someone being like, oh, I'm going to make 1 or 2 grand right here and then go be a bum for a while just on my motorcycle.
Yeah, man. It was, and also you have to remember, you're not being tracked at all. There's no cell phones. Like, that's one thing that they specifically talk about is and these groups were organized like a business. Let's talk about this, because this was one thing that they broke it down a lot.
Right.
The group, wherever it was formed, Oakland, San Bernardino, Orange County, insert your favorite part of wherever that was, all had a local attorney that took all their calls and handled all their bail bonds, that the leader of that group would go and talk to on a weekly basis or have contact with, that they could get in with daily. The rest of the guys were wherever the hell off in the world,
right,
and would be like, hey man, on Tuesday in Billings, Montana, I'm going to be at this payphone. Call it. Other than that, I'll see you next week. You're like...
Right. Yeah. So they would have different things to call in and keep track, or like, you have the local Denny's. You're like, hey, has Fish checked in? Like, yeah, he said he's going up to Montana or something. Like, cool. I think I know where he's at. Bye. Like, have you seen Nagy? Like, no, he hasn't checked in a while. Because there's, like, the guy even, like, they said one of the guys would even just be like, I don't even know where I'm going to be later. I'll call you. And he would just constantly traverse, like, the states and highways.
I could see you absolutely falling in love with that lifestyle.
I mean, just, if it's sustainable, I mean, yeah, why not? Just, like, where are you going? Like, I don't know. Like, I hear there's good surfing down in LA, and then you bomb down there. You're like, this is crap. I'm going to bomb up to Oregon. And you just do that. You're like, I'm going to go hang out in the mountains. Like, again, the lifestyle was also doable. Like, and it's, what's funny is they talk about a bunch of the older guys have like steady jobs, and they're almost seen as, quote, queer in the eyes of the other Hells Angels. Cause they're like, yeah, this guy held down a steady yearly job and then would just come out on the rides and the meetups and the travels like once in a while. And like, that was weird compared to everybody else who was just like, oh, I'm just doing what I can to get by and keep riding.
Yeah. So another layer to that is like, not everybody in the Hells Angels was a very high IQ person. They made this very clear. Like Hunter S. Thompson even took time aside to go, hey guys, just so you know, like, we're not dealing with authors and intellectuals here. We're not dealing...
Their thoughts and daily occurrences are not... They're not sitting around the campfire pondering life.
Exactly. And they're looking for their next dopamine hit. They just have no cares in the world. But dealing with that is those guys that often had the steady jobs in like nowhere towns, and were like the check-in and the informant for that town. And the younger kids didn't really see that and realize that. And the older guys that's kind of their job, is like, okay, Jara hasn't showed up to the bar in 3 weeks. Jara, you alive? Okay, got it. Cool. And Jara's like, man, he's so annoying. This, that, and the other. Like,
right. That also, like, the safe havens where it's like, yeah, you guys can always come crash here, but like the Brotherhood only went so far of like, yeah, you can crash here for a while, but after like a couple days, I'm kicking you out because I know what this leads to, of you just getting too comfortable and stuff. So it's like, he describes how the guys would be able to, you could always go get a meal, you could always have a place to sleep, place to pick up your bike, whatever, but then also could like very quickly just be kicked out of like, all right, that's enough time. Get back on your bike and keep rolling. Yeah. Like, I was a pit stop, not like a, base of operations.
Yeah. Everybody gets a week, no questions asked, because that's kind of how we roll. Right. But after that, it's like, hey, what you doing, bud?
Well, they talk about, like, especially the females of the group, mainly the wives and the moms and the women.
I was about to say, let's talk about the mamas. Yeah. That's a whole thing.
Like, they would always cook meals for... Like he says, they'd always be ready to cook meals for 5, 6, 7 guys, have a place to stay, clean up, patch up, kind of do stuff. But again, these guys were pretty grungy humans. Like, so to not shower consistently or wash their clothes or do whatever, like,
don't exclude the part where, including of cook them meals and help them out, they would absolutely do every debaucherous deed that you could possibly think of to these men every time they came in. They would let them put it in any hole they wanted. All 9 of them, 6 of them, 12 of them. Like, there's more to it too.
There was levels. A lot of the wives and stuff like that were pretty untouchable. And he even says that at a party, the husbands, when their wives were there, wouldn't do anything. Yep. And then, there was the other class of women called the mamas that, were kind of just the group bicycles. And like they kind of would either be with one guy and it was kind of known, or they were just free-spirited, kind of free love kind of stuff. And again,
but even still, when they were with that guy, as long as you kind of asked his permission, it's cool.
I mean, free again. This is still a period of like the free love. It was just a little more aggressive because it's a biker gang and the debauchery. But I mean, it was the 60s.
It was the 60s, but that's also where like you hear all the stories of rape come out on the media as well, because since that this was really known in that community, this is where women would go for it and then run away and tell the cops or whatever when things went south and didn't go their way, which was really fascinating to hear on, again, both accounts, because there were definitely times where the Angels were wrong and absolutely abused every bit of the situation. But there were other times where the woman wanted to be
saying
abused.
10 guys. Like, she was consensual with all 10 of us. Like, you guys are kind of fucked.
Yeah.
Or the one where,
Or the several times where they wanted to be abused. And then when things went south, they were like, hey, local cops, it was these guys that did it. And they're like, no, brother. First of all, it wasn't just us, but it was.
Right. No, and I mean, I think that was one they like to throw out. And Thompson and a bunch of the other guys talk about how, again, 60s, very conservative, kind of modest times. And you get all these, quote, bad boy bikers that roll through. A lot of females flock to it. And then the allegations that, it was probably non-consensual, because just like any girl, like, you go to the party with the bad boy, then you learn he's an asshole. It's like, well, that's still rape, dude. Like, so but again, it's a fuck thing. And it was very interesting. A lot of those cases never even came to fruition. They would be brought to trial, they would go in, and then they'd just be dismissed. And like we said, the articles would always, rape, and then at the end, like, hey, you're going to talk about how that was dismissed with no charges filed? Like, nah, we've moved on.
Nothing.
But again, like we said, the things that they did were they were very dark. I was going to say, like, we weren't there, we don't know, no one knows but them. But I will very much assume that they were dark places, and all of it probably happened in some context or another.
Oh, we can talk about how they got, like, jumped in and out of the Hells Angels, first of all, with the guys. When you got your colors, first of all, there were 2 things that told how long an angel had been in. Basically, it is the shade of your colors. If they're brand new, you're obviously brand new, and then they get darker and worn over time. Or if you're an old head with brand new, you've been in so long that dude is a wizard. Do not touch him. Because his colors basically got shattered in his last motorcycle accident. And when we mean shattered, unrepairable. So, and that's after he's been wearing them for 37 years and didn't wash them that whole time. Right. So these dudes, to get their colors worn in, guys would throw oil on them. They would throw shit, piss, anything to get these kids kind of indoctrinated with their colors. And it was their way of hazing. And so a lot of the younger kids smelled absolutely atrocious because they wanted to just get their colors dirty because they wanted to seem like they've been in forever.
It makes you look worn in.
Oh, dude. Could you imagine like being in a group, like in a bar with a group of these guys? Ugh, the smell.
So that like you said, they like urinating. I don't think fecal. Like I don't think they shit on each other, but like that was a joke. They even talk about like passing out early. Like it was the common joke to be like, "Yo, Donnie passed out," everybody get around him and piss on him. Ha ha, we're funny. Like, I picture it as like the Jackass things, like the movies.
Yeah.
If you watch the behind the scenes and they're like, dude, during filming, everybody's such a high stress level because they're fucking with each other so much. These guys lived it, but like they weren't doing it for laughs to get on camera to do it. They were doing it because that's what they found amusing, of like, yo, Fish passed out. We're going to take pisses in his boots and pour beer all over him and his bike. And then you wake up like, what the fuck? You're like, ha ha, yeah, we're funny. Like that to me, yeah, like you said, it was, if you're in the bar and you're like, why does it smell like body odor and like stale piss and beer? Oh shit, the Hells Angels just walked in. Like that could be your line of thought.
Yeah. And then they also had a whole bunch of different initiations depending on which group you were in. Varying from jumping to you had to commit a crime basically to the point where you couldn't go back. Like you basically had to get a wanted
right.
sign where you could be like, all right, guess what? He can't be an accountant anymore. It's, like right. I don't know. It varied a lot of places, but it was weird because I remember one guy came into the bar specifically and they're like, everybody loves him, man. He just like doesn't want to commit a crime to make his way in. And you're like, what do you mean he doesn't want to make a crime? You know, he just doesn't want to get wanted by the cops. So we'll never have him. And you're like, again, back to the not bright IQ people. You're like, you could come up with a million different things to humiliate somebody that have nothing to do with a criminal record. Or even the game could be not get a criminal record and do the crime, because even that's like better.
Yeah, get away with it. Yeah, get away with it. Like, no, get arrested. We'll bail you out as like a group. Like, what? Why? No. So so they talk a lot about honorary members. The people even say like, oh yeah, you know, Fish should have been a member. He hung out with us. He was a cool dude. Blah blah blah. Like, why wasn't he? Like, oh, he just doesn't do enough crime, so we couldn't make him a member. We couldn't give him his colors. You're like, oh, okay.
No, he's like a good mechanic and takes care of us and works on our bikes and always makes sure we get home. But yeah, he just doesn't want to stab a dude. So
right, yeah,
fuck him.
The level of violence was a very interesting thing to read about. That's kind of where my idea more of the Hells Angels was, of like that brotherhood kind of thing of like, if you got into a bar fight for whatever reason, it was like no questions asked. Everybody was just like bombing it, like Peaky Blinders style. Like if you messed with one, the whole crew came crashing down. No questions asked, no like thought put in. Like, yo, these guys punch Fish in the face. Like, cool, we're gonna go beat them all with chains. Did you find out why? Because Chris like stole their beer and like groped their room. Like, doesn't matter. Like, you don't touch one of us without permission. Like, if they knew the reasoning, they might put their own laws and like ideas on it. But like reactionarily, they were just like, nope, full bore, get the chains, like break the glass. It's a bar fight.
That was one of their rules, and a very interesting mentality that they took on, which I thought was absolutely fascinating. Of they had pretty much two rules: is like always bear your colors, and because basically you just had to have them on at all times because that is your counterculture to society. And part number two was always have your brother's back. Like, it was an all-for-one mentality, no matter what. And that was with everything. Feast, famine. Like, they were very much like chimps in that aspect of, like, they understood fairness, and they would beat the shit out of you if it wasn't fair. Like, if you brought home watermelon, everybody gets an equal share of watermelon, and that goes, like, for the whole group. Right. And vice versa. If somebody punches one monkey in the face, all the other monkeys are jumping on that monkey no matter what. There was a specific time at the end of the book where Hunter S. Thompson actually got beat up. There was one guy, he was sitting at a bar and just kind of lost it and beat the shit out of him. Like, there was no real reason to it. And Hunter S. Thompson remembers one of his buddies going, all right, back it off. And it was one of the bigger guys. But this was after the point where he stood there for a moment and probably let everybody hit him so that they could all feel involved before he would.
Hunter S. Thompson talks about it. He's like, I remember looking up and seeing him kicking me. And then he stopped everybody from kicking me, being like, get out of here, dude. So it was like that. Like, what are we doing? We're beating this guy up. Like, oh shit, I know him. Maybe we should stop. All right, that's enough. Like,
did everybody get a shot in? All right. Yeah. Only one.
Yeah.
And they're like that with everything. In beer, alcohol, women, and anything. I remember one time specifically, Hunter S. Thompson talks about too. They went up to a mountain thing for a trip, and he was like, he remembers the cost of alcohol down in San Bernardino versus like Lake Tahoe, I think they were at. And he was like, I'm not about to have an economical lesson with these guys on how they're about to get a third of the beer that they normally get for the same price. So I'm going to go down there and hopefully try to get over this before they beat the shit out of me and come raid the whole bar. Right? Like, it was...
Yeah. So they go. I can't remember the name of it. What do they call their trips? It's like, it's not like the voyage, it's not the pilgrimage, but they take the trips that they would go on, where the gatherings. Yeah. So every gathering is like they do it a couple times a year, and then, so in this case, the town knew they were coming and says, "You guys can be here, just stay here." And so the Angels give Hunter S. Thompson like $130 and say, "Go get all the beer they're expecting us." And he's like, I'm not about to come back with half the beer that they're expecting, because it's, usually less than $1 a 6-pack. And if I show up with 60 cases or 60 6-packs and they're like, where's the rest of our beer? So he brings the guy with him to be like, yo, this is what happens in, a high demand place, so that it's understood that I didn't just steal from the Hells Angels.
Imagine having to explain that group was so low IQ that you were around with, like, look, I'm going to explain this because it's the truth. Right. I can't avoid it, but I need a witness in front of me.
Yeah. How beer for where you get it's $1.30. Yeah. Here it's $2.30. So that means less beer. But yeah, they ended up running out, like getting the beer run and doing stuff. And then,
what you mean less grog for same coin?
Yeah. But then they finally get his car packed with all this beer. It's just, he says that his car just became the beer cooler. So everybody was just like, you didn't mess with the car, you didn't do anything, you didn't steal. It was just a beer cooler until it started kind of running lower on beer. But this is after 9 hours of partying in the wee hours of the night. And that's when that like greedy lizard mentality of people started like stashing beer and like taking some, and some people would go pass out. The rest would be like, we're going to fight over the last X amount of beers that are here.
Or you would go and just like take some LSD and go to bed. Like in some random spot in the woods.
That was the crazy thing when the introduction of LSD came. It was pretty funny that these guys, so prone to violence, started, they did have their own trips, but yeah, Hunter S. Thompson talks about they go to these gatherings and there's a bunch of people having a bonfire, getting into crazy debauchery and fights and, getting all over each other with guys and girls. And then he's like, yeah, but it was also super common for people to just take like way too much LSD and just be screaming and crying in the corner of the party because they're just on this crazy trip. Like one guy thought that he'd die if the song ended. So he was like, towards the end of songs, he was running up to the stereos and slamming another like 8-track or tape into the jukebox or like into the stereo to make it play more. Like these guys are having these full on like psychedelic experiences while they're surrounded by just like mayhem.
Or you would just go out in the parking lot and find like 5 of them laying starfish. Just having
like,
a
see
moment.
Those guys over there on the bad trip? Like, yeah, go hang out with the guys over here on the good trip.
Yeah, they're just having a sesh. Because first of all, drugs were very prone across everything with these guys. But what I also found very fascinating is like, you had your cocktail boys who would put anything and everything down them, and Hunter S. Thompson talks about. But then he also talks about there are guys that are very specific about things, and they're like, nah, just mushrooms and booze for me, man. We're good.
Right.
Like, and then other dudes that he was like, no, you would walk into the one room of the house and you would gas out at least the whole story. Like the whole second floor would get contact high just from you opening the door. And you would walk into the rooms and there would be just Hell's Angels laying down absolutely cooked. So every sort of drug use you could find. Yeah.
Yeah, but like you said, the cocktail ones were always fun of like, hey, do you got any pills? Like, what are you looking for? Like, yes. Like, they just wanted handfuls of everything. And, I mean, but they regulated enough for the most part of, if it was like the gatherings, they had their campground, it was more of a free-for-all. But if they were kind of on the move, it was like, they would kind of be like, dude, you're too fucked up to ride. Like, we'll see you later. And so that's where that gang herd mentality sometimes had a weird aspect of like, yeah, he knew we were making big tracks and making big distances. He got too fucked up. That's on him.
Yeah, and I also really enjoyed the different drug dealer aspects because he talked to a different bunch of them that were drug dealers, and one of the guys was talking about how, yeah, man, I just get the drugs and sell them. I have no idea what's in there. They just tell me the amount. I don't test them. Like, I just kind of watch people and see what happens. And you're like, oh, so even the drug dealers don't really know what's coming through. Now, again, back it was the 60s, so it wasn't like they were getting bad batches of anything, as in fentanyl or anything. But, like, if you get LSD and it says it's, whatever, 5 milligrams, that could be anywhere between 15 and 2.
Right.
So,
yeah, I mean, that was actually interesting. I definitely thought these guys were way more affiliated with, I mean, take any biking stereotype from 22 Jump Street to Easy Rider, like all kinds of stuff. But no, it was very surprising to learn that, like, yeah, these guys were just mainly a group of vagabonds that just didn't want to hang out in a 9-to-5, just loved their bikes and camaraderie. And yeah, definitely got into some darker shit, but like they weren't drug dealing. They just wanted to have drugs. Yeah. Like, their dealers were like, like we talked about with the local Denny's or the payphone, they would do that for drug spots as well. Like, hey, do you have anything? No. Like, okay. Sorry, dude. My guy in Minnesota's dry. Let's go see what's going on in Wisconsin. Like, and they just keep rolling.
It was. Now let's talk about this because I thought this was really fascinating. Somewhere around, I don't know, late 60s, early 70s, they started letting media in, which was really, really interesting. And Hunter S. Thompson talks about this because, again, you're dealing with a lot of low IQ guys, and everybody wanted their story on the Hells Angels. And they would all, I'd say, 7 out of 10 times portray it poorly. They would get the clickbait that they wanted and get dumped the rest of the story and be like, hey, yeah, we went and robbed 7-Eleven on Tuesday. But what he doesn't tell you is half the food that he gave to was the poor kids down the street. He just robbed 7-Eleven. And, you know, they don't tell those sides of the stories. And so the media would come in with the guys with Hell's Angels and be like, hey, I'll give you $200, which you have to remember $200 back then was probably 10 grand right now. You know, like it's a decent chunk of change. And they're like, we just want to follow you with cameras for the day. These guys are like, oh, we'll take $200, give it over. And obviously they would just have it in cash and pay them. And then the news media would follow them around and almost created this celebrity. Well, they did create a celebrity idea of the Hells Angels. And that's where you kind of got even more growth in the biker thing in suburbia. And these guys were really pissed about a lot of how they were getting portrayed, but they also were not bright enough to realize that they were also not paying attention to what was going out. They would just let these guys in for money and then get the byproduct of like, hey, who are these suburban dads wearing fucking colors? Beat the shit out of them, man. They're like,
right. Yeah, and like Thompson talks about that because he, like we talked about, he was in it for a very long time, more fly on the wall, versus a lot of the other media that would come in and want specifically, like, hey, let's get you guys with your bikes in front of the bar, holding all your chains, like you said, creating a narrative. And at first, it started of like, yeah, this guy's giving us money to just take some pictures and talk about ourselves. And then the backlash of like, oh, we're getting all this, the Hells Angels were banned from so many towns before they even got there. And they're like, we didn't even fucking do anything. And it's like, yeah, well, the last place said that you guys, drunk and disorderly, causing mayhem, burned down this place because it did whatever. You're not even allowed here. So then they started getting really pissed at, reporters and things like that. And would threaten Thompson a bunch of times, being like, if you ever print shit like that, we'll kick the shit out of you. But then, like you said, didn't really have the brains to like, hey, did you see the new article that came out on us? Like, there's an article about us? Like, dude, like, they're not making those connections and, like, almost helping that narrative be about how bad they are and, like, why they're not great people. And then, or like they said, or just like, why the hell are these, squares wearing our colors? Was like, they weren't involved in what's going on. They were just taking the quick fast grab and then not realizing the, like, buzz media that was coming out.
And with that too is like the media knew that these were low IQ people. So they clearly took advantage of them as much as possible because it was really interesting because they talk about it as it grew over time. The older guys would be like, hey, this is a safe house. Don't bring any of those fucks around. I don't want to deal with it. They're only trouble. And then the younger guys would be like, come on, man, we're doing this thing and we're making... It's like, I realize you're making money, but stop.
Yeah. Yeah, that, and like it got to the point where they were like, you guys, they did have enough self-recognition to be like, no one talks to the fucking media. Don't do anything. They want to take pictures, cool. Don't answer questions, don't do whatever. Like, fuck them. Unless anyone could vouch for them on other levels, it just got to the point of like, basically, hey, are you part of the Hells Angels? Like, no comment, like, because it was, don't talk to anyone because you guys just can't, and it's just not helping anything we want to do.
Yeah, it was wild. Yeah, and so I guess I don't know. What else you got in the book? I think we covered it.
That's the crazy thing is like we put a story to it. And I go, that is more of a story than what this was because spoiler alert, the book came out like 50 years ago. It ends with some funerals and they talk about like gatherings and kind of how it faded out because of the media and the perception of the Hells Angels. And it went from, oh shit, the Hells Angels just strolled into town, like get out, to, oh my God, the Hells Angels are coming. Let's go get pictures. Bring your, like Thompson talks about these young kids wanting to go see the Hells Angels like a sideshow. And so even a lot of the Hells Angels kind of lost a lot of the jazz and juice with it. But like then it just kind of ends. And that's again this style of journalism that's like,
yeah,
all right, I'm talking about the Hells Angels. You should have known that from the title that says Hells Angels. And I'm going into the meat of the story too. The end, that's how I talked about the Hells Angels. Like, again, it's not like a narrative that starts from A to B. It's all over the damn place.
It was written published in 1967. So,
yeah.
Decent chunk of time ago.
And it talks about, again, the pre and during Vietnam, when all that's going on and things like that. And yeah, it very bizarre, but it was again an insane style of writing for that time because of, again, go look at any of the movies or media or stuff like that. Then you've just got this guy that's like, yeah, I was taking LSD and smoking grass with all these guys, and people are like, you can't do that.
Yeah, it was a great time.
I will pass on that. But I think it could have been like, again, fly on the wall. I would follow that place all over. I would go back in time and follow that around. The true involvement, no, thank you.
I could see where, like, when we got off of cruise ships, it would be very appealing to me because it's just a lifestyle. I got some cash. We'll figure out some stuff along the way. Like, I could see where, as a young man, there would be people that would flock to that. and want to become a part of it. But yeah, so dude, we're doing book club again. This was such a fun podcast. So I was going to say
this was a fun one, especially branching out from a style that I didn't really have an interest in. I was like, because Hunter S. Thompson, again, pretty infamous of whatever, Fear and Loathing, again, has even a narrative for how kooky it is. This one was just bonkers because it was all over the place, and it's my first true introduction of reading him, not seeing a Hollywood portrayal of it. So I am keen to inform our listeners on other crazy things or just things that, we should all know a little bit more about. But
so overall, I would say I would recommend this book. I'm going to go, give it a read. You?
I mean, it definitely passed the time well. It was a very interesting, again, it's something that's I'm reading for my escapism and fantasy. This one's okay, this was a very different level of finding out about other stuff. Are you going to come away from this more intellectual? Absolutely not. Will you learn something? Yes, you will.
No, here's the thing. I think you do intellectually learn something because you get to play the game of looking at a true scenario that happened objectively, right? You get to play the game of what was the truth. Because here's one thing that Hunter S. Thompson did really well is he never really told you the truth. It was just quotes from the Hells Angels and then media quotes and stories and articles. There were very little interjections from Hunter S. Thompson, except for when things needed to be clarified. The part of, I was getting my ass beat, and I clearly looked at him when he looked at me, punching me in the face. Or, there were parts where he had to describe that, but a lot of it was just the two sides of the story. So you get to play the game of okay, how much of this was actually so on and so forth. And you learn just kind of, or you think, okay, are all the Hells Angels lying to Hunter S. Thompson when he asked for quotes and things? So you get to play the game of objectivity of what's the truth, which I think is really fun in this story.
Did you see The Last Duel, the movie with Matt Damon, Ben Affleck? No. So it's interesting. It reminded me of this because it's exactly like you just said. It tells three different sides of a story. It's not a great movie, very slow burn, but that one we could go off on another time. But it's just like you said, where you've got Hunter S. Thompson's narrative, you have the direct quotes from the Hells Angels, and then you have the quotes from the media. And that's it. And like you said, it's on you to, well, what really happened? Who fucking knows? It was the 60s, times were crazy, but here's the 3 points of view of whatever thing. So again, it was a very, I will say I recommend it, but grain of salt. There are times where he's just talking about a quote where this guy's talking about his bike for X amount of time. And you're like, oh, he met this dude and the guy talked about his bike and then everybody rolled out and went to a bar.
But I think those parts are so necessary because what they add to is the wholesomeness of the angels, right? Because you get the part of you understand that these are just dudes. To some extent, they're just bros that watch football on Sunday.
I mean, personifying evil always has its things, but it was interesting to say to see it from another light and round out kind of where it's going to be. So it was I'm very glad you recommended this. And, strong-armed, Nagy, just go read a fucking book, bud.
If there's any action item I can say to all of our listeners is just go read a book. Just go read a book. Go read a book. It's going to be a good time. With that...
But we can also... If you're not going to read it, don't worry. We're going to tell you about one. So we're going to go read a book, too.
We're going to go read a book, too, after we strong-arm Nagy to read a book. I am glad that you got over the hurdle, and I had to leverage my birthday to make it happen because I've been trying to push for this one for a while. We did try and start one called Amusing Ourselves to Death, and Nagy got an hour and a half into it listening, and he was like, bro, This ain't happening. I don't care what you say. Give me whatever motivational speech you want. Ain't going down.
Yeah. No, I think we got, because it's only like, what, 6-7 hours, or maybe it was less than 10. And I think I got a little over halfway, but that one is like, dude, it's worse than Marcus Aurelius' like stoicism of just, that one is facts on facts. And you're like, there's a narrative, but what's it about? Like, I don't know, just all the history of things. So I still want to try and give that a go. It's in my Audible, just staring me in the face like, you want to continue listening? And I'm like, no, no, I don't.
And it's got a lot of heavy concepts too, because it's got to like super meta itself out compared to other books. Because it's like, look, you have to comprehend that anything you do has a form of language. There is body language, there is scientific language, there is holy language, there is business language, so on and so forth. And then you have to sit there and comprehend in your own head of like, oh shit, yeah, like, damn, okay, I get what you're like. I get.
And this book, Riding with the Hells Angels, was much of like, there is your id and ego, and this book follows the id of a bunch of people in the 60s. Ready, go.
Yeah, exactly. Guess what? Just buckle up, because it's about to be Aerosmith's ride at Disney World.
Right. So
you come out the gate at 70 miles an hour.
And a very cool present from you, your unbirthday present to all of us, that it's not our birthday today.
Yeah, my unbirthday present to everybody. So, yeah. All right. Anything you want to leave the people with?
No, just get out there. Don't be too scared to try new things. But I say that, and then I still am. But baby steps.
Hey,
baby
you started today. You started today.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to hear other books from us, leave a comment down below. Also, give us a like. It helps with the algorithm a lot if you want to see more of this. I mean, we're going to do it anyway. Who cares? But it helps your algorithm for us to keep popping up in your algorithm and see our beautiful faces every day. So, thanks.
This is AB Fantasy, brought to you by Schnaggles. Hey guys, Nagy here. Got a nice little book I wrote. This is for my son Atlas, available on Amazon. You can order your copies. This is an alphabet book to teach your kids all the letters of the alphabet with amazing pictures and fun rhyming schemes. I was really bored of reading Atlas's books because they weren't entertaining, so I decided to make one of my own. But check it out. Give it a like on Amazon. Made it as cheap as possible while still making a solid $1.50 for myself. So check it out. It'll make the hero out of all of us while we learn the alphabet together. Thanks, guys.